You asked for it. Now we're delivering it. We're doing a deep dive in time trials. Let's throw the green flag on this episode. I'm back in the Atomic Autosports studio with Darek Koman from NASA Time Trials. And Darek, it's great to have you here today.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. The way you and I got connected was interesting. So we had Glenn Robinson and Jay Andrew from NASA on the episode, and it was getting shared a bunch by NASA Great Lakes. And somebody said, why don't we talk about time trials? And I said, let's talk about it. Who do I need to connect up with? So Jay got me connected up with you. I think, or no, it was Chad? Chad got me connected up with you. Yeah. So I know we had a bunch of back and forth. Between that time, there's been two NASA Great Lakes weekends, NCM, Mid-Ohio. I do want to talk about those a little bit, but it's always great to connect with someone. And a lot of our listeners, time trial, time attack is their jam. It's their event. They love it. It's their joy in motorsports. What drew you to time trial?
Well, I think I just naturally progressed through. I'm a NASA Great Lakes HPDE graduate, so I started out in the program. So went through HPDE 1, 2, all the way. At some point, you got to HPDE 4, and you're turning laps and getting the car more and more prepped for less for driving on the road and more prepped for doing the stupid things we do on the racetrack. And just started to become more competitive, and it's like, well, time trials against the clock, right? So versus just turning laps, so just naturally kind of got my provisional time trial license and just threw my car that I was driving every day just in there, just with some basic mods, and it I guess evolved or devolved from there depending on your perspective. And I did it for many years, with several cars, and eventually, due to the, I think, unique structure of how NASA does time trials, is the time trial rules are, car classing wise, are the same as super touring. Mm-hmm. So it's very naturally to all of a sudden at one weekend you cage your car, and the next thing you know, you're getting a comp license and then racing, to the checkered flag rather than, against the clock. So I think that's kind of what drew me to it, is this was a natural stepping stone of practicing, basically for qualifying, for car control, using all the track, learning each new track that you go to. That's kind of how it ended up for me.
Yeah. You told me before the show started, Gran Turismo and Fast and Furious, kind of maybe what gave you the driving and racing bug. What was it about those experiences that said, hey, let me go find out how I can get on track?
I don't really know. It's just something that kind of happened. As a kid, before I had my driver's license, you pick up a controller and, you played some racing games and go from there. At some point, as I got older, I realized I was a tinkerer, right? I'd love like iterative improvement. So just cars turned into that, hey, I'm going to throw a sway bar on my car and see what that did, and just constant, and it just turned into that running joke where it's an expensive hobby, right? Constantly tinkering, constantly making changes. And I love going to the track with a plan, with I'm going to try turning my dampers this way for this weekend. I'm going to use one of my practice sessions and make a sway bar change. Hey, let's try different tire pressures. Whatever that is for that weekend, I kind of try to come in with something, and that iterative process of I made a change. What did it do? Notate that. And I think time trials is great for that. Multiple sessions throughout the day, and try stuff, right?
Yeah. When you're making those changes, how are you recording those? You have a notebook? You're using an app on your phone?
I'm really bad at taking notes, but generally I just open a notepad on my phone, and I have a couple of baseline settings for shocks, sway bars, tire pressures, and I try to say, hey, +2 front compression, and then that's what I'm trying. What did it do? And at some point, I kind of leave it alone after it feels good enough, but I really need to like push myself to go back to like, hey, don't be afraid to try different things, and try, hey, what happens if we take out some rear compression and add some sway bar, right? Both increasing both will, make the car oversteer more, but which one does it where, right? And how to changes the car dynamics in that scenario. So like try not to get complacent with my settings on the car.
Right. Yeah, but that's a beautiful thing about, like you said, time trial event or test day. You make those little changes and see how things evolve, and it could make it better or it could make it worse. And you never know until you try and experiment. So
yeah, exactly. And time trials, as anybody who's run it a long time, a lot of the times it's the fight against the weather, right? Tires they like heat until they don't like the heat, and same thing. It's like there's limits, there's perfect little brackets of tire temperature and track temperature and whatnot, and a setting that might have worked in the morning that might have netted you a pretty good time. The car could start getting sketchy, understeer or oversteer, towards midday or the end of the day, and you may not be able to match that time from this morning. But what you can do is figure out what shock settings or what sway bar settings kind of work for those hot weather conditions. So when you are in a competition, or you do end up moving to wheel to wheel, and your race is at 3:30, but qualifying was at 9, right? That's going to be significantly different conditions, and having some level of notes on, hey, I'm at Mid Ohio. The car really liked this and turned in really well with these settings when it's 60 degrees out or 50 degrees out, but now you've moved to, it's now June and it's 85, 90 degrees out. Do you back out some rear shock, rear sway bar? What would you increase front sway bar? What do you do there to get the car to behave in a 30, 40-minute race in 80, 90 degree heat versus an April event where it's 40, 50, 60 degrees, right?
Mm-hmm. And the way that you're using that information, is it just the feel? Is it the lap time? Is it a mixture of those two? How do you say, okay, I like this change, this is what I needed?
Two things. I think, lap time is king in time trials, right? Did this make me go faster? To a certain, but sometimes consistency is key when it comes to longer sessions. It really depends if I'm setting the car up for one really fast lap, or am I setting the car up for, do I want to survive 35-minute race? And do I want an edgy car, or do I want something more stable? And I think, again, that's where time trials is where I learned a lot of that, is trying things, using all the track time available. Yeah, sure. I set my fast lap time already for the day for NASA time trials. Fastest time of the day wins. A lot of the times that's before noon. And a lot of people like to pack up their cars and not go home quite yet, but not really go out there. I was the guy that was throwing on scrub tires or just going out there and say, okay, well, I will be running an event at some point that it's going to be this hot. Let's see what the car does, right? Track time, you paid for it. So I'm a very big advocate for use it, right?
Right. I want to go back to your early days with NASA, and what made you register for one of their events and get started in the HPDE program?
So I got started in racing kind of through friends, as most people do. I started with a non-NASA organization, just locally did a high-speed autocross, was my first one, 100% bone stock car on all seasons, as most of us, will do something stupid like that. Not stupid, it was fun. And was young, didn't have a lot of money, so I wasn't really doing it very often, maybe one a year. Eventually just ran into a coworker that was a NASA instructor, and he's like, "Hey, NASA events coming to a track near me. You should swing by and check out the program." And started into HPDE, and that's kind of where I stayed. I very rarely do non-NASA track days. I'm there at almost every one at this point, and at least for the Great Lakes region. But that's how I started. Just a friend got me into it. I went through, had instructors, got checked off to the next run group as my skill level progressed. I got more comfortable with things like heel toe and trail braking, car dynamics and setups, alignments. As the car got faster and faster, I switched cars a couple of times. And yeah.
What car did you start with?
For a very short time, I was running a 2007 Subaru WRX. That car didn't see a whole lot of track time. I went through some of the the stereotypical ones, but not the one that exist. I didn't blow a head gasket. I didn't have any engine issues, but just street driving the car like somebody that was young did. I went through a transmission and a rear end under warranty, and said this is probably not the car for me to continue my track story. So very shortly after that, I got an Evo 10, bought it off the showroom floor, and was my everyday car. And with very little mods, also did HPDE with it. And one weekend, it turned into a single seater with a roll bar, harnesses, and no interior. When I just bought myself another, very cheap, what they call it, beater with a heater, kind of a car to get around every day. And the Evo turned into a full-blown time trials car for many, many, many years. I think I petitioned that car for 8 years, I think, in NASA time trials.
And what do you drive today?
I have a 2005 Honda S2000 prepped for time trial 5, Super Touring 5, mostly Super Touring at this point. Yeah.
Is it caged?
Yes.
All right.
Fully caged. So
there you go. Have you
fire extinguisher, kill switch, you name it.
And have you done any ST5 races other than the time trials?
Yes.
Yeah.
I got my comp license back in 2019. No, 2020 is when I got my comp license. So I've been doing wheel to wheel for the last 6 years or so.
Oh, cool.
But again, with the beauty of the rules is, hey, sometimes I'll look at the competition and be like, there's one or two people. It's kind of a light and vet and super touring. I'll drop down the time trials and put down some lap times with the time trial folks. It's the beauty of the cars can go, as long as you have the safety equipment required, your time trials car can move up to super touring, and obviously vice versa. The super touring car is technically an overbuilt time trials car, right? From a safety perspective.
Right. Oh, that's great. So these last two events that you for 2026, NCM and Mid Ohio, did you race in ST5 or did you time trial?
So NCM, I actually ran time trials, and then I was supposed to run ST wheel to wheel this last weekend in Mid Ohio, but during Saturday practice, my differential decided it didn't want to do differential things anymore.
Oh, man.
So yep. So basically parked it for the weekend. It still drives under its own power, so figured save the manual labor to try and winch it up into the trailer, so to just save whatever's left of the differential. And we'll be back for the next event in Mid Ohio in like 3 weeks or so, 3 or 4 weeks.
Oh, great. Very good. What advice would you have to somebody that's thinking about getting involved in the sport and why they would want to look at time trials as a good opportunity for them? I think we've kind of hit on some of those things, but maybe dive into it a little bit deeper.
Yeah. So I think it's a awesome middle ground / good landing spot for people who don't want to jump into the deep end of fully caged car. They still want to be able to have a usable vehicle on the weekends. There's a lot of cars out there that are very, very, very competitive with full interiors, and a passenger seat, and you don't have to do a whole lot of making the car not usable, versus wheel to wheel competition, you're going off the deep end, right? You need a trailer, truck. It gets expensive fast, right? When you take that leap. But with time trials, there's a ton of guys that have little autocross single axle trailers with some tires, some fuel, a jack, and some tools, and they drive their cars to the track. We have one person, NASA Great Lakes. He uses an S2000 and he tows a little pop-up camper, a little small lightweight pop-up camper with him, and he stays at the track. And the talk of the town, he's like, "Man, you're towing that with your race car," and I think that's really what attracts time trials. Also, it's relatively lower risk than taking damage on your vehicle from impacts from other cars like wheel to wheel. We know that at some point it's a matter of if, not when. It's when, not if, that you will come in contact, whether lightly or hard, with another car. Just it's the nature of the game, right? And time trial cars have a tendency of looking a lot nicer than race cars. Body panels are still straight. You don't generally, you drive within the limits of what you're capable of, and as long as you do that, cars have a tendency of staying on track. And it's when you have something a little bit more expensive, it's a lot nicer.
As one of the heads of the time trials program at NASA Great Lakes, is that a hindrance to getting track time? Do you find that those responsibilities take away from your ability to get on track during the weekend? Does it enhance it? Do you like the balance of that?
I try to, because of that reason, I try to avoid participating in time trials at the same time that I'm running the program. It is stressful. It is very hard to get through all the impound procedures, work closely with tech, getting the cars scaled, getting the cars dynoed while I'm out there at the track at the same time, on the track at the same time as everyone else. So definitely one of the reasons why I mostly try to run super touring wherever possible, even if maybe there might be some tires on the line for me from a contingency perspective or something, by switching to time trials rather than staying in super touring. But it is difficult to get on track. It's difficult to make every session from a time trials perspective. Super touring, it's not bad. The schedule, I think they do a really good job. I think Jay and the crew do an awesome job with the schedule to try to accommodate as many people as possible, whether it's us as series leaders and instructors to be able to jump out of cars and then get to their own sessions, with trying to make the sacrifices for the volunteers and staff as minimum as possible. But yeah, there is, as an example, Mid-Ohio, I can never make Sunday morning practice because my time trials meeting is literally when the cars are on track. Like 8 o'clock warm up and 8 o'clock meeting. I can't be at two places at one time. So, it's a lot of prep, a lot of planning. A good example of that is, mornings are very, very, very hectic with all the meetings, with the NASA staff meetings, getting everyone on the same page, with me talking to tech, making sure I have all my paperwork in for all the competitors, on top of trying to get my own car ready. Mixed conditions, is it going to rain? What tires do I put on? Making sure my transponder's good, making sure my camera is ready to go for the races, and just getting dressed, throwing a race suit on. It just all has to be backed up, and you're doing things maybe an hour and a half earlier than you would normally be if I wasn't a series leader and running the time trials program at the events.
Got it. Speaking of time trials program, I asked you sort of like what are the mistakes that you see, and it's people not using data, not experimenting, and not using all of their track time. We kind of talked about the experimenting part with, changing your dampener settings or your sway bar settings. But maybe for someone that's newer in the sport, they don't have adjustable suspension or even the mechanical ability to swap out a sway bar. What are some things they can experiment with during either a time trials event or a track day to make, get a different feel for the car?
Yeah, so I think, time trials is definitely the place where I started learning the most about car setup. Tires are the, black magic art of going fast. So starting to figure out how to use a pyro, tire temperatures, and you can do that on all season tires without anything other than, an expensive pyro from Amazon or your local race supply store, and trying to say, okay, well, what does tire pressures do? What is this? Alignment you can't really change at the track easily, but it gives you an idea of, hey, I did my first event. I was on my stock street alignment with, zero point 0.5 degrees of negative camber on the front of the car, and my outside tires were just cooked, like the outside edges. And then you add 2 degrees of camber, and you're like, wow, that made a huge difference in tire temperatures. And you start to get a feel for what does that look like. But the experimenting side is not just with setup, it's also with your driving, different lines, different techniques. What if I trail braked a little harder into this corner? What about if if I, instead of braking, I just lift off and roll more speed into the corner? What about if I turned in a little bit later, right? Everyone talks about the perfect line, and what does that look like? I'll say I struggled a lot early on in my learning career because I was driving heavy all-wheel drive cars and reading your typical Ross Bentley books and things like that, and being like, hey, when you do this, the car should do this. And I'm like, my car don't do that. Like, it just doesn't. The driving style, I think, between rear wheel drive, front wheel drive, all-wheel drive is slightly different, and car setups have a lot to do with how the vehicle dynamic changes mid-corner. Front wheel drive, all wheel drive are very much get rotation done early and get back on the power, right? Get that straight line as soon as possible. And switching from an Evo to an S2000, going from a 3,400-pound all-wheel drive car to a 2,700-pound rear-wheel drive car was just, it was very different in mid-corner dynamics, what I can do and what inputs I can play with to get the car to do certain things, especially mid-corner, right? The Evo didn't really like small mid-corner adjustments. It was like abrupt lift, get the rear end to step out, and then put the foot right back down to pull out of the corner. The S2000, I can do minor throttle or brake adjustments mid-corner and get the car to kind of change the nose where it's pointing, or I can get the car to rotate. I have a very nice diff in the car, and I can get the car to rotate nicely on power, even with all four hamsters spinning at 8,000 RPMs. So that's the kind of things that I tell people, hey, like, keyhole in Mid-Ohio, try a later apex, right? Try to get the car rotated earlier. So it's not just car setup, also just driving dynamics and what your car is going to do.
That's great advice. How about advice on data? What should folks be doing? Again, whether it's time trials or just an HPDE event.
So I've seen a lot of people, come into time trials, and they don't have any sort of data, like anything, no app, no lap timer, no data acquisition system, and they go out there, they drive, they think they're driving the doors off the car, then they go look at the results spreadsheet and be like, wow, I went a second slower, right? Mm-hmm. And then I asked them, well, where or why? And they can't answer the question, right? I felt like I was driving hard. The car was, more understeering, more, the rear end was stepping out, and it's hard to pinpoint where, how, or what actions or what driving caused it, right? So with new people coming in, I'm like, get something. it doesn't matter what it is, a lap app with a 10 hertz GPS, little Bluetooth adapter, something, so you can see on your screen on your phone when you're there that when you take a corner and you trail braked a little bit more into China Beach, that you saw that your predictive went 2/10 faster, or you tried something and it went, well, that was half a second slower, right? And you can really tell where you get that immediate feedback on where and what happened. Now, you may not know what you did right away, but you saw green. You see a lot of green on that screen, so whatever that was, it worked. And then you can sit down between sessions, take a look, and say, okay, what was that? What was the actual device that helped me go faster there on that corner? And then you look at your speed trace, or if you have OBD2, throttle and brake is super, super useful. And you're like, wow, I braked later here, and I found time, or I got on throttle sooner. And that's another fun thing that I tell people is newer cars have a significant advantage here, because an OBD2 dongle, and you get so much data from the car. You can even get yaw. You can get a bunch of stuff off of some of the newer vehicles from the ABS modules. Brake pressure is huge. Throttle trace is very important too. You have a dinosaur car like ours, anything older than mid 2000s, and you're buying sensors, right? Mm-hmm. You're buying brake pressure sensors. You're trying to tap into an ECU that the refresh rate is terrible, so you somehow need to get better throttle position. You're not really getting as much data. I'm really jealous of some of these new cars compared to my 2005 Honda, where there's not a whole lot I can get from the factory ECU when I was still running it. And I have to basically get analog or digital sensors aftermarket for pretty much anything that I'm trying to collect on the cars.
Oh yeah, and having that data is great, like for all the reasons you mentioned. But you could also use it for some coaching opportunities. So you should be looking at it at the track. You should be looking at it when you get back. But if you have that data, you can share it with somebody else and say, hey, I think I'm doing well, but what does the data show you as a driver coach? And remote coaching has gotten super popular in our sport too. So that's another reason to capture that data and don't delete it. Find ways to use it, right?
Yeah, and I talk about calibrating your butt dyno sometimes when it comes to that with the data. Is a lot of us are used to driving at street speeds, where 1G is fast. 1G is a lot of lateral force for street driving, and that's what we mostly do. We mostly drive on the street. So when you get on the racetrack, it's hard to like recalibrate your butt sometimes, where you turn in and you get on power, you start to lean against your seat, and you're kind of subconsciously going, well, oh man, I feel like I'm going fast, but you're only generating 1.1 Gs, when your tires and car can do 1.2, 1.3, 1.4. I ran into that, a March NCM event, and the Evo was always like that. I was looking at the data, I was like, why am I so slow? Why am I 2-3 seconds off my time from October? And I made a braking mistake, and I just broke a little later than normal, and I'm like, wow, the car took it, and I didn't go off track, and it felt controlled, and I kind of beat myself up a little bit back in the day. I'm like, you just wasted a whole day of driving around at 1G, basically at like holding yourself back, because your butt dyno was calibrated driving all winter, at a certain pace. And that's where, data review or knowing what's possible is important. Some of the most information I've gotten and faster I've done is sharing data with friends and competitors, and doing some coaching or throwing a hot shoe in your car and getting a reference lap of somebody who can extract the performance from the car, and just setting, going out there for 3 laps and just setting a lap time and being like, hey, like this is like what your car's capable of. And, you're not going to get there today, but there is cornering performance here. You just got to build up the confidence to be able to extract it. And that's where understanding your data and understanding how to use it is there. That's your data is not the upper limit, right? Your data is how you drive the car, not necessarily the car's full potential. And it's hard. I found it hard to kind of figure out from my data where I could go faster, because when you're comparing laps between your lap from last year to this year, that's still your own driving. That's still the same car from last year, maybe with some changes or some upgrades. But it's very, very hard to look at data, in my opinion, and be like, oh, I'm not carrying enough speed here, right? Without some other reference point. I'll be honest, I haven't gotten a chance to play with some of the more AI, more like adaptive learning devices to really see like how well they could push an average driver to figure out the car's potential without necessarily having somebody demonstrate that potential for the first time.
And the last mistake that you said people tend to make is they don't use all the track time they paid for. What do you mean by that?
So I think I touched on it a little earlier, and that was I set a fast lap time this morning in the cold weather and the colder weather, and then they just parked their car, right? And then they just like, I don't want to put heat cycles on my tires. I don't want to break the car. There's some, I think I can understand that sentiment considering I just broke my car this last weekend. So, every minute on track costs something, right? Like from a maintenance perspective, whether it's oil, whether it's tires, wheel bearings, hubs, there's a lot, everything's a wear item, right? To a certain point. Chassis is a wear item to a certain point, right? And I think I see a lot of competitors, pack up early on Sunday to try to get a, head start on the road. But, you did pay for, all 5 sessions every day, right? For each day. And there's something to be learned. There'll be something to be gained. I see people sit out rain sessions. I think, there's a lot of car control to be learned there. I think it's very, each track is very unique in where the grip is in the rain at different levels of how waterlogged the track is, and being able to go out there and find that in a controlled environment in time trials is like the perfect time. I love rain races. I love driving in the rain. It's therapeutic a little bit because everything just kind of slows down a little bit. You're not loading the car up with crazy G's every corner, and it's more like this game of, well, if I take this really weird line and just drive around the outside of this high-speed corner, like, is there grip there? Yeah. And that's what you find is driving these awkward, weird lines that feel very unnatural, but that's where the speed is, and building the confidence of, especially for the time trial drivers that eventually want to make their way to a comp license. You're going to get rain races at some point. You're going to have to drive 30, 35, 45 minutes if you go to nationals in the rain, potentially side by side with somebody, and understanding what the grip is, having a general understanding that, hey, I'm going to have grip now, but as soon as we enter the corner, I'm going to be on the normal racing line, and that's going to be an ice rink, right? And I'm not going to be able to get on throttle there. Or is it better to back out of this move right now in the rain and just follow through and find a better place to get that speed and to get that pass done, rather than maybe, going down the inside of China Beach when you're going to cross over the race line, and it'll be very slick at that time. So that's more what I meant, I think. From
that is great advice. And one thing that disappoints me is when I'll go to a wet track day or HPDE event and there's nobody there. They all bailed. They asked for refunds. Maybe they didn't even register. They were just going to drive up and register if the weather had turned out. And it's such a learning opportunity in the rain, just like you said. Plus, I know it beats sitting at home, right? Get to the track, whether wet or dry. I do want to talk a little.
Well,
go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, Derek, go ahead.
I was gonna just say that a bad day at the track always beats a good day at the office. It's kind of what we've been saying, especially with people when you do have mechanicals and things like that. You're like, some days you're the pigeon, some days you're the statue, right? So when it comes to that,
yeah, I want to talk a little bit about advice. What's the best motorsports advice that you received through your journey?
Oof. Let me think about that one. I think it was probably just get out there and drive, right?
Mm-hmm.
Seat time, as much as everyone doesn't want to hear that, is but in seat on the track in your car driving is the best money spent versus any mod that you can put on the car. I know it's very stereotypical, but I think we all get trapped in buying coilovers, buying shocks, what's the hot new tire, do I need aero, and ultimately I think we do this for driving on the track, right? And I think we spend a lot of time in the garage prepping the car and working on it. And sometimes it's just better to step back away from the garage and make sure your car is safe to drive. Obviously, brake pads, brake fluid, make sure everything's tight. But it just turn the laps, go have fun. It's probably the other thing I think somebody told me, which I've been kind of telling you. It's the strangest community right out there. You're out there and everyone's relatively competitive, and you're banging doors, not quite banging doors, but you know what I mean, with a competitor, and they're not going to give you an inch on the racetrack, but something happens to your car, he's the first guy underneath your car helping you bench press a transmission into the car so you can make the next race. And everyone is helpful. Everyone's willing to hand you a tool, let you borrow something. There's always a guy with a welder somewhere in the paddock, right? For fixing something that you're not supposed to really fix trackside, but you want to make it out for race 2 and 3 on Sunday. And get out there, talk to people, meet everyone. Just go out there, drive, get some seat time. And it's also the friends you make along the way and the relationships. I met some people in the Great Lakes program that now whenever I need to do something really big to my car, I'm like, hey, can you come over? I'm a YouTube certified mechanic, but I'm uncomfortable with some things and opening up certain systems that I'm just not. And you'd be surprised how often that person's like, yeah, hold on, do you want me to bring any beer or whatnot? And you'll end up spending endless weekends with those people, and they're going to be some of your best friends. Yeah,
there's no doubt the people in the paddock are 99% of what makes this sport great. The other 1% is just the adrenaline rush of being behind the wheel and putting it down. And if it weren't for the people, I don't know that our sport would be as big or as fun as it is. So you're spot on with that. When someone comes up to you and they need some advice, or they're like, hey, what do you want to tell me about the sport? What advice do you give to folks?
I tell a lot of people, I get a lot of car setup questions, a lot of, what do you think? I'm looking to get into it. How expensive is it? And I always tell them that the world is your oyster, right? You can race a B-spec car, you can run a first or second generation Miata for relatively inexpensive, and you'd be surprised how close to golfing the sport can be from a price perspective. Get something you can drive to the track. But then you could also go buy yourself an LMP3 car, right? And it turns into, and it can turn into, you're driving around in a house. And it's, you don't have to buy the stickiest, most expensive tire that only lasts one weekend. You can run yourself on some Enduro 200s that can last all season, depending how many events you do. I think it's tell them start out small, start out with something economical, and work your way to, big V8s, prototypes, if that's where your passion is, once you get your handle on it. The other thing I do tell people a lot is when you're trying to get into the competitive side of the sport, aka time trials, wheel-to-wheel racing, please devote some time to reading the rule book, and taking a look at what modifications you can and can't do to your cars for what your targeted group is, or reach out, talk to people in the paddock that are running similar cars or are in time trials. Nobody in the paddock, like we just said earlier, is going to withhold information from you. They're going to tell you, hey, I run a Nissan 350Z. What should I do to make it track ready? The people that are going to give you the best advice are not the people on the internet forums or asking ChatGPT to what I need to do to the car. That guy that's been running the Nissan for 8 years on track and is doing time trials or wheel to wheel is going to be your source of truth on what breaks, what doesn't break, what you should reinforce. And it's weird, right? Every car has its quirks. Miatas have hub issues. Spec Miata, I think, finally, allowed some billet rear hubs now, that they can do, so they're not running the stock Miata hubs anymore. Everyone will, they'll knowledge dump on you. They'll give you a list. They'll send you a spreadsheet of what they think the maintenance items are, and what parts break regularly. Talk to people. Definitely talk and reach out. I actually just yesterday, I received a random Facebook message out of nowhere from somebody not even in my region, because they saw a photo of my car and wanted to talk about aero on an S2000 and what my experience is with running a splitter or not running a splitter with a wing on our platform. And that's what we're here for, right? And yeah, he got a very long response.
Well, and that's something I want to highlight too, is we talked about the people, but reach out to one another. If it's somebody at the track that's running your same car, go over and say hi, ask them what they're doing with tires or tire pressures or this or that. If you see someone taking a faster line or they're at the top of the podium every event you see them at, befriend them, ask them some questions. Because like you said, Darek, people are willing to help. While we might be competitors when that green flag drops, we're here to help one another. The more people on track, the better the sport is. We're getting close to the end here. Is there anything that we didn't talk about that you wanted to?
I think we covered everything.
We did.
I think for the most part.
And we got more technical than I thought we would. This is great because a lot of the listeners love to hear about some of the things you talked about making the changes on the dampeners, the sway bar, getting, the tire temperatures is something else that a lot of people want to hear about. So I do have one more question then. Have you ever been late to grid?
Yeah. I mean, it was 8 years of being an instructor, and you prioritize your student over your track time. There have been times where we're doing a little dissertation talking about the line and everything like that. I'm like, oh shoot, that was the 3-minute whistle, and I'm not suited up, to get and usually something like that, or you're barely got your car running, after a mechanical and trying to get to grid on time for quali. It happens. Yeah.
Well, I very much appreciate you taking some time to share your motorsports journey with us and tell us more about NASA, the passion you have for time trials and the sport in general. So thanks again for being here.
Awesome.